Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. So today we're going to do things a bit differently. Sometimes I go all out like I did last week and prepare multiple lectures and read the text and that sort of thing. This week, I don't know, I had a great deal of difficulty. I wrote, I don't know, probably like 4 hours worth of lectures for today, and I just decided to kind of throw all of them out. And for a number of reasons. I mean, I feel like I was talking to a former student the other day, and I think what makes I think what makes my classes effective is just kind of being real and being present and being genuine, and finding that especially important when we're talking about Advaita Vedanta, which requires a particular mode of learning, a mode of engaging with one another, but also because I don't know, I feel like I just, maybe it's just the time that we're in right now, and the place where I'm at right now, and I think these are days when a lot of us are feeling a good deal of anxiety, a good deal of angst, and a good deal of disconnection. And so trying to teach this particular topic that we're going to talk about today in a virtual setting just seems so radically far removed from the context in which it is intended to be discussed and taught. Not just because it's a white guy teaching a bunch of other white folks about Indian philosophy and Hindu theology, although that's a factor, but also just, my dissertation was on, so today we're going to talk about the Manduka Upanishad, and I'll introduce it in a minute. But my dissertation was largely on pedagogy and ways of teaching, the way that the tradition has taught these texts, the way the tradition has passed this sort of sacred learning on from one generation to the next. And as you'll see in this text, there's even a moment where Shankara, the teacher, instructs that it's a text written for teachers and teaching them how to teach the text. And Shankara, the teacher, says that you need to have this moment, this very important moment, where the teacher points at the student, at their heart, right? And that personal embodied connection is so deeply important in order to grasp the meaning of this text. And in order to do that in this virtual space, honestly, I'm just open to suggestions because I haven't been able to figure out how to do that, but we're gonna try. And I think that the only way we can even come close is just to make this as dialogical and conversational as possible. So in the past, I've done most of the talking, and then we have discussion. But this time, I got to give you something for us to talk about. So I'll kind of kick things off. But I want this to be, far more interactive than what I've made the previous classes. And also because this is our penultimate class, at least for the live classes. We've got one more next Thursday, and we'll kind of wrap things up. And there we're going to talk about the Bhagavad Gita, mostly chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita and chapter 11 of the Gita. So we'll end, as I said before, on karma samskara, and we'll talk a lot about karma. But in order to understand karma and what that text is trying to communicate, at least from Advaita's perspective, I think we need some of the philosophy and some of the core stuff. So in order to do well with that, I need to do well today. So that's where we're trying to get. I think I laid the groundwork pretty well last week. I think a lot that's in this text I actually taught last week, the 4 states of consciousness and the various ways of being, and a very rough introduction to the philosophy or theology of Advaita Vedanta. I began this with a mantra that those of you who've been watching the videos have seen once before. It's a mantra from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishads, which is one of the I think it's the largest. It's definitely one of the largest, together with the Chandogya Upanishad, 2 of the largest Upanishad, which are these theological texts from. Those are both around 500 BC or so. And so that mantra, asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotir gamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. Gamaya means lead us. Lead us. Again, it's always us together. Teacher, student, everybody who's learning can't learn this kind of material alone. It has to be learned within a community, within a context. So lead us from asato to sat, from non-being. In Sanskrit, the word sat means being, but it also means truth. And so lead us from untruth to truth. Lead us from non-being into being. Lead us from tamas, from the darkness, into the jyotir, to the light. So lead us from darkness into light. And mrityarma amritam gamaya, lead us from mrit is death. And amrit is sometimes translated as immortality, but literally it's just non-death. So we could say the fullness of life, or to the fullness of the present moment, to a fuller appreciation of the present moment. So what I want to do to kick things off is kind of pick up where I left off last week, as I was watching the video from last week, and I introduced this Aurobindo's notion of double evolution, and I gave you, his what he calls terrestrial evolution is just what we think of as sort of regular evolution, Darwinian evolution. And then, but he also talks about involution, which is a kind of spiritual evolution, which is a coming together, that notion of team. I do this a lot, right? The sort of the people together forming a one, the many, the 11 members of the soccer team forming a team. So that's kind of what he means by spiritual evolution. But double evolution is basically putting these ideas together, but a little bit more to it. And I didn't talk about it last week, so I want to now. And the way I think reading his text, which again, quite large, and I should also say it wasn't written. It was written over a long period of time. It's in 2 different books. And the first book, I believe he began writing in 1919. Somewhere around then, and but he didn't complete the full thing until the late 1940s. And so he was writing, as I mentioned last week, very influenced by Einstein's theory of relativity, and beginning to rethink notions of transcendence and immanence, or what we call physics and metaphysics, from various perspectives, but also writing in the context of the entire world. Everybody I think knows the basic history of the first half of the 20th century, which was a time of tremendous upheaval, tremendous reformation, particularly in India, right? India went from a British colonial state into an independent state. And so most of that, happened in 1942. And in 1945, of course, was when the United States dropped a nuclear weapon, or atomic bomb, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So to be writing about these notions of physics, right, these great breakthroughs in physics, which made possible these breakthroughs in understandings of the relationship between ideas and physical matter and energy, notions of consciousness and how we think, how we know, and those kind of things. But also the same breakthrough leading to nuclear destruction. And so this was not missed by Aurobindo, and this was, I think, deeply influenced his understanding of double evolution. And so double evolution, I like to think of in terms of like these two spirals. So if we think about the spiral kind of going up from an ascension. Ascension you can think of in terms of an evolving, a flourishing, an unfolding, as we've just explained it before. So this unfolding between one breakthrough leads to another, as Sir Isaac Newton said, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so when one person makes a breakthrough, then other people build on that breakthrough, and you have this flourishing of ideas and this unfolding of technological innovation. So he wrote a lot about technological innovation, and so this sort of unfolding of all these potentialities, the possibilities unfold in various ways, and it leads to this sort of pinnacle of technological ability. But it is not, as Aurobindo argues, it's not usually accompanied by a corresponding evolution of ethics. So just because people have these great increase in the amount of technical capability, they can do a lot more shit, but that doesn't mean that they know what to do with it, or that they understand the risks involved or the power that they wield. And so this leads to some sort of pinnacle of power, and it often becomes this unfolding. You can think about it in terms of natural selection, right? So you have an unfolding of a lot of ideas, but then it gets reduced as certain people, as a smaller and smaller group of individuals wield that power, the power of that new technology and things. And this often leads to periods of tyranny and oppression, as Aurobindo puts it. So this leads to a devolution, not an involution of the spirit, but a devolving, a reduction in that unfolding, right? So the unfolding into possibilities, and then a reduction in the same way as we have natural selection. But when we hit sort of a bottom point of that, where we recognize the power of these technologies for good and for bad, then it leads to sort of a period of introspection and spiritual evolution, and unfolding of ethical possibilities and ethical understandings, and that can also lead to an increase. So this is kind of what he means by double evolution. You can think of one circle in terms of technological ability, and then another circle in terms of ethical evolution, right? And understanding of what to do with that power, what to do with those innovations. And I was speaking to Rachel and Brandon, her partner, the other night, and we were talking about the COVID-19 vaccine and this mRNA technology, which is a very, very new technology. This has not been done before, and so it's to me it feels like a significant jump in our technological ability, our evolutionary ability, and but it may also lead to some sort of ethical devolution. So the question of questions of equity and access and all sorts of questions that I think we're as a society getting at now. But I don't know. I find this pattern of double evolution, not thinking of evolution in this sort of straight line. Oh, we're getting better and better, or we can do more and more things. But instead of a much messier pattern of technological innovation followed by periods of unethical periods, followed by evolution of ethical. Ethical thought, I guess. So I wanted to toss that idea out there, and I want to go to the Ras Lila in a minute. But before I do, since that's kind of a significant jump, just want to open it up now and hear your thoughts, on what we talked about last week, and including what I just covered now in terms of Aurobindo's understanding of evolution and involution and spiritual cohesion, I guess, or anything else you want to raise. Any brave souls? You're all brave souls.
I spent a lot of time thinking about all your movie references.
To the Matrix, or what? What are you talking about? Which
The
movie?
Matrix, yeah. So the Matrix, when you were talking about some of that in some of your lectures, and then when you brought up Robin Williams, and then it's funny because it triggered a movie for me from Robin Williams, who I've always adored, The Fisher King. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Especially when you were talking about the cave in one of your lectures and talking about how people can be perceived as crazy. And if you've never seen The Fisher King, Robin Williams is kind of perceived as that. And it's like this quest for the Holy Grail. And I'm reanalyzing all of the movies I've ever looked at in a different way, kind of because of you.
Okay, good. I like to hear that
Yep.
for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and I've also, the Fisher King came to my mind after last week's class too, and I want to go back and watch it. Is that something I should watch without the kids or with the kids?
As a pediatric nurse, let me think. I know, right? I don't know. How old are they?
Cyrus is almost 10, and Lila's 12.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look and see what the rating was, because I forget what it takes place in the beginning. Isn't it about him, the loss of his wife, that kind of sets him on that path from the DJ, and maybe screen it first.
I'll screen it first.
Yeah.
I was thinking a conversation that came up today actually at work. We were doing COVID testing. We do it every 2 weeks, and we've all been double vaccinated now within our program, which is wonderful. And they really have done a great job making it available to family and everything else. But we were kind of talking about, only the rich countries are doing it. And we're not really putting that ethical, we're doing as you said, the de-evolving sort of ethically of the me first, which makes me wonder, if you don't give it to so many places, the variants that rise will come. So if you don't sort of try to do a world.
Oh, we lost you, Lorelei.
Oh, sorry, I must have hit it with my finger. But if as many people even got that first one, or as many different locations, trying to put blocks of minimal herd immunity in, even versus every rich country is going to be double vaccinated, and my family's double vaccinated, and every coworker's double vaccinated in the United States, and it's that amazing. But in New Guinea, no one is vaccinated. Those variants will rise, and we are in a global society. And all of our amazing work will be for nothing, because my double vaccination is going to be useless against that new variant. So I think, there's not a lot of thought about that, or discussion about what is possible when you only target 12 areas,
Mm-hmm.
So we were kind of just talking about like how great it is that we got it, but will it matter in 12 months? Will it matter, when that next South African, whatever variant really rises up? And, I know they're working on boosters already, but things evolve that we don't want. And we're not really focused on that.
Well, you guys may not be aware, but we have an expert in the call in emergency management, and maybe has some words of wisdom to share on that point.
It's a complicated and highly divisive issue, to put it nicely and apolitically. So I'm actually in a public health class right now, and what we've talked about a lot is like we talked about how like even internationally, it's not really like you've got the UK version, but one of our classmates is I think she's in Zimbabwe, I think, and like there's no vaccine there yet. I think they may be working on their own, from what I remember she was saying, but like no one's really reporting cases. Like the testing's at a minimum, but their cases are kind of down. But like, so like, there's not a lot of testing, so the numbers are down. But like, they're not really locking down as much, and everyone's sort of spread out, so it's not as bad there. And they're actually sort of doing a lot of more holistic and Eastern medicine treatments there that seem to be working. But like we're talking about like the vaccine inequality, it's like, well, you know, if this doesn't become a more like planet-wide thing, you're going to get those variants, and like we're in a lot more trouble then.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's I think I thought about this a lot more last year. It's been a year, but maybe thinking about Aurobindo's notion of what he calls Gnostic self or Gnostic mind. That's what I was describing last week in terms of team, right? Thinking that sort of that fourth state of consciousness that's more in terms of a super organism. I think just kind of on both of those points, Lorelai's point and Irene's point, I think maybe for me the virus has highlighted the fact that we are one global community, even if we don't act that way a lot of the times. Nevertheless, we are one super organism, and this virus it just spread, and now we're in a race, right? An evolutionary race, because every time it spreads, then the variants arise. Yeah, Irene.
So it's funny. I read a political article for class, and I think it was from last March, and it was like trying to predict what would change during and after COVID. And one of the things was, COVID will be a unifying thing. It's like, well, we can all get sick. It's going to hit all our communities because no one's really stopping it. So, like, it's going to be something that brings everyone together. And like, America, historically, and as we can see now, is very much an individual-based kind of society. It's about me and my immediate family. The community, as long as the community's functioning, it's fine. But at the end of the day, it's me. Which is why we've had so much trouble, like with lockdowns and the shelter in places and that kind of thing. It's like, well, you can't tell me what. There's also a lot of like politicians that are not doing that, and it's like, well, if you're not doing it, why should I do it? But that's aside. But like in Australia, they locked down for 6 months. People were not leaving their homes, and now they've cleared. And like people sort of pushed back against that, but it really showed like, are you more concerned with the community or more concerned with yourself as an individual? And like, I too kind of thought at the beginning of this that it'd be like, well, we can all get sick. Like this is going to affect every single one of us in some way, shape, or form. So it's like, yeah, I would, by looking after myself, I look after my neighbor. And like, if we can all sort of do that with each other in mind, then it's a community-based response. But it's not what it's been like. It's more like, well, I can protect myself if I believe the virus exists, but if I have to do something that impacts my neighbor or my community, I'm not going to do it because I'm more concerned about myself, and they can just do whatever they want. So I think
I also hear, and maybe Michelle, you hear this too from nurses in the community. I mean, that shift of idolizing the healthcare worker to demonizing them. Don't tell me what to do, right? Yeah. I mean, just a really upsetting. We're cheering for you, we're clapping for you, you're saving our lives. You're going out there without a vaccine, no PPE, you've been using it for a week, you're on no sleep, you're our heroes too. I'm not going to do any of the precautions. I'm going to be out at the bar, live my life, and could you please save me? And don't get mad about it. I mean, why are you upset? just the morality shift that we've seen over the last year of how people are treated, what's recognized or not, the personal responsibility that, it's almost like everyone had a limit and they all hit it at a different point of how long can I be moral? How long can I be responsible, ethical? And it's kind of interesting to see how that shift has happened. There's no healthcare hero spotlight on the news. It's, maybe we throw a candle for 500,000 dead, and that's a big deal on the news for a night. But it's almost like the short attention span of society of can we move on, as if there's not an evolutionary race of will this planet shake us off maybe because it has the potential to, and we're all like laughing at it like it's nothing, but there are things in our history that have shaken us off and started us over. So I just think seeing that, it's almost like a barometer of what is your morality and how much will you sacrifice or not do or not engage in. Or we thought at the holidays, who's going to have Christmas, who sat home alone, who it was an interesting thing to kind of watch over the last year devolve.
So I think this is an economic term, but we talk about it when we talk about the National Flood Insurance Program, which subsidizes flood insurance people in flood zones. It's called moral hazard, and it's like it's a lack of incentive of people to take cautionary measures if they're like, well, there's like, we have a protection against the consequences. Like, I'm not going to buy flood insurance if the NFIP is going to subsidize it and like come in and be like, oh no, it's okay, we've got you. And like, it's the same thing. It's like, I'm not going to take precautions against COVID because there's a hospital down the street and I can just go over there and be like, well, I'm having trouble, work it out. And it's like, well, yes, but you then become a drain on the system because you could have done something to prevent it. So yeah, moral hazard.
Yeah. I'm definitely seeing some more of those morality things happen even in the school system now, because I work in public schools, and you can see it with the teachers and the ethics and everything that's kind of coming into play with, they're now talking about bringing all the kids back, and we're getting into that whole ethical, we're getting into that whole ethical dilemma of, but the teachers aren't vaccinated. I mean, and it's just,
Yeah, I don't know if you know, Brad, because you're not in our state, but they just announced that we're all going back. 3 feet is far enough apart because it's MCAS time. So they've got to get those standardized testings done so that they can make sure that, that's taken care of. So we were all told that maybe by April we'll be healed, and 3 feet is as good as 6 feet. So they're going to bring all the kids back by April, kind of regardless. So that was an interesting development in our area.
This reminds me of the Allegory of the Cave a lot, because I feel like people deny the truth even when it's right in our face. And if it's a bandwagon type of thing, if everyone in the world is like, okay, this is real, like stay inside, stay 6 feet apart, then everyone's like, okay, like it's on their minds and they're acknowledging it. But when the truth is like more subtle and takes a person's actual, like takes effort for somebody to actually acknowledge it, I feel like it's so much easier for people to choose what's convenient. And then we're seeing that through this pandemic, that's like not only just a social controversy, but an ethical controversy. And people are talking about, if you're going to go out to dinner, just think that, you could infect your waitress or waiter, and then they could infect their grandparents or whoever. And like kind of bringing attention to that like butterfly effect type of thing, or the domino effect. But yeah, it definitely reminds me of Allegory at the Cave a lot, what we talked about in that video, in your video on YouTube, because it's fascinating to me how society and people as a whole can be so willfully ignorant, and but as soon as like everyone's in on it, then it's like this whole different thing.
Yeah,
and then
thanks.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That ties in with where I want to go next, and also takes me back, I think, to even the first day of class, that what Socrates was and maybe why I'm eager to continue this format, this discussion on YouTube, just because YouTube is like our most public forum these days. But what concerned Socrates more than anything was the fact that politicians are interested in politicians. Right? Politicians are interested in getting elected. They're interested in their own self-interest, and they use their platform in order to manipulate and to lie. And so Socrates' big concern was that people would believe what politicians say, and I think time has sort of shown us over and over again that people do believe what politicians say, and politicians use that to divide us and to serve their own means. I don't know how we ever get out of that. I mean, Socrates' answer to that is education. The only way out of that is to encourage people to think for themselves, to be able to tell the difference between opinion and perspective, to tell the difference between fact and opinion. That requires, if everyone is doing that, then good things emerge mostly from that collaborative phenomenological investigation. But if it's only a few voices sort of dominating, then bad things happen. And just to tie in, because I do want to get to the Ross Lila next. But thinking back to Lorelei's point about ego, right, and that we have this, concern for the community or concern for ourselves, that egoistic concern, and this I think is really how Aurobindo explained this this ethical devolution, right? The what you might call unethical, right, change, and it's always a change from concern for my community to concern for me and myself, right? And so when our concern is increasingly egotistical or egocentric, then that's when we're in this period of ethical decline, or ethical devolution. And then the involution, the spirit becoming involved and us becoming involved with our neighbors, and that sort of teamwork, that collective effort, that communal, what he calls Gnostic mind, is what then leads us towards ethical evolution. It's sort of the next stage where our circumspective concern becomes wider and wider, extending our concern, well beyond just our own egotistical self. Let's all right. This is gonna seem like a big shift, but I'm gonna make it relevant. I mean, it's not gonna be hard to make it relevant. If my tech guy CJ could put up the Ross Lila picture, and I'll just kind of talk over it a bit. So this is if you just Google Ross Lila, you'll find tons and tons of versions of this, but they're all basically the same thing. So it's okay. You can leave it big just for a minute. So we've got at the center of this circle, it's a circle, and so at the center of the circle you have Krishna, and so Krishna is standing there and he's playing his flute, and Krishna is so basically the story is Krishna was out in nature. He kind of is nature. We'll talk about Krishna more next week in the Bhagavad Gita, but he just he likes nature and he lives in nature, and he's out in the forest. And he likes music, and so he started, listening to the birds and the bees and everything kind of around him, and so he wanted to join in their chorus, playing with them. So he pulls out his flute and he starts playing. And all these gopis, these cow herders, the people, milkmaids, you might say, they heard the music, and so they were attracted to it. So they came over to hear him play, to listen to his play. And then as they were enjoying the music and getting into it, so they started dancing. So they started dancing in a circle around him. And then Krishna, sitting there playing his flute, and he sees all the gopis dancing around him. He decided he wanted to dance with them. So being supreme God and creator of the universe, he can multiply himself. So he multiplied himself so that there were many Krishnas. So there's the Krishna in the middle playing the flute, but then he made lots of copies of himself so that he could dance individually with each and every gopi. And so then you've got lots of Krishnas dancing with lots of milk carters, and everything was groovy and everything was great. But then what happens is the gopis then, at first they're like, wow, I'm dancing with Krishna. This is awesome. This is great. And then they're like, I think Krishna's kind of into me. And, they're like, Krishna really loves me. And Krishna, it's like, he's kind of like my Krishna. And so their concern goes from sort of being in the mix to more, I am in possession of God, right? God is mine and I possess God. And so that turn becomes more egocentric, where they're so close to God and they're feeling that, as we've talked about mystical union, mystical experience in the past, where they felt so at one and so united with Krishna that, as Kusa said, they couldn't imagine that anybody else would also experience that. So they felt, okay, Krishna is mine. And as the story goes, as soon as any one gopi thought, okay, he is mine, I have possession of God in a way that nobody else does, poof, that Krishna would disappear, right? So there's this idea that Krishna or God is always with us, and with us at a very, very personal, in a personal way, right? Being in relationship with Irene is different than being in relationship with Lindsay, which is different than being in relationship with Lorelai or Michelle, right? We each have we're different people, and so God loves us in that very unique, personal way. But if we then take a step further and think, okay, now I am in possession of God, then, God says, no, you're not. I'm, the God of all creatures. I think you can take the picture down. Thank you. So that's the Ras Lila, this dance, and so this personal, individual relationship with God, but we don't have possession of God. And I watched as I was preparing one of my many lectures for today, I watched this dancer. I was just kind of like skipping around YouTube, and I heard this dancer. So she's not a philosopher. She's not like a trained scholar or anything like that. She's a trained dancer, and so she's a professional Bharatanatyam dancer, just the classical Indian form of dance. And she was explaining, like, when you are in the dance, there's different, I think any performer, musician, actor can relate to this, that there's a time when it's no longer, like, I think about playing saxophone because that's just my thing, but when I'm playing the music, there's a time when I can no longer really tell the difference between myself and my instrument and the music. It's just sort of all we are, I am the music and I am the instrument, and they are a part of me. And so thinking back to that question, that issue of ego, because I think ego is something that plays a significant role in each one of these, right? The COVID situation and that ethical evolution, the Ras Lila, and then also in this experience of non-dual union, that there's sort of what happens is there's sort of the ego dissolves, right? The ego dissipates. There's no longer any ego. Ego is what forms like a barrier, or in Shankara's terms, a veil between subject and object. And that subject-object, that veil between subject and object, is what we call ego. And that gets in the way. And in the past, we've talked about, Irene brought up Irenaeus, this great Christian theologian, one of the church fathers, and talked about clay. So I got some molding clay, and this will lead us into the Mandukya Upanishad too. But so Irenaeus, so we need to allow ourselves to be, if you were to even just, I took this out of the plastic like 45 minutes ago, and it's already kind of starting to get, rigid and crumbly and things. It's not as pliable as it was. So Irenaeus said, we need to keep ourselves moist and pliable, flexible, so that we can remain open to the Spirit, and so that the Spirit might shape us into who we need to be. And so that we might, if we allow ourselves to be that open and flexible, then others will see the fingerprints of God, right, on us. So those fingerprints on the moist clay. And so where this is kind of leading me to, we're gonna talk about the Manduka Upanishad in a second, but it describes that third state. Remember last week I introduced the 4 states of consciousness, and the third state is that just deep sleep, right? It's just deep sleep. There's no dream, no perception. You're not dead, but you're kind of close, right? You're just there. So there's no conscious activity. So the conscious mind is there, but it's not active in any way. And this Upanishad describes that as prajnana gana. Gana means just a lump, like a lump of clay. And so there's just like a lump of consciousness there, but it doesn't have any form. It's only when we're dreaming that or in our heads, when our mind takes different forms, or when we're awake and alert, or those sort of hyper vigilance or vigilant state, when I see something and then my mind takes the form of that thing. But all of these are kind of somewhere in the mix is ego, right? And to the extent that the outside world is shaping our conscious mind, or whether our ego is shaping that conscious mind. And I think we've all had experiences of both of those things, right? Or maybe thinking about in the 4th state, where it's not, so if the hypervigilant state, maybe Fisher King applies there too. But when you're in that kind of state, the world, the external world is really doing the shaping, right? It's not me that's doing the shaping, but the external world is telling me what to think, and that's what's happening, right? The conscious mind is taking the shape of those external objects. In the dream state, there is no external influence, right? It's my own mind giving shape to these things. And in the deep sleep state, it's just prajnana gana, just a lump of consciousness. But maybe if we could start thinking about that 4th state as somewhere in between, right, where I still have agency, I am still shaping my own, I have agency, right? I am the self, I am part of what gives this conscious thing shape. I have agency in that, but I'm also still open to others, right? So if you think again about the soccer example that I gave last week, when you're on a team, right, I need to have my agency. I'm the one who decides when to kick the ball, whether I'm going to try and score, or whether I'm going to pass, or whatever, right? But I need to be also deeply in tuned with my teammates and my surroundings, with my ecology, with my environment. And if I do that, then it's both my agency in concert, or in concord, to use Kusa's term again, kind of working together. I don't know. So this is, I gave you a lot there. So I gave you the Ras Lila, started talking about the Mandukya, even though I wasn't planning to talk about it quite yet, and this clay example. So let me sit down and continue the conversation that we were having a minute ago, but now with some new food for thought. Oh, and Matt wrote something. He has to run to a meeting. Many of it's out of sight. Yeah, I'm not sure what. I think I missed that. I'm sorry about that.
So I was thinking about back to Socrates and sort of the handing down of the truth. So in your last lecture, you talked about sort of Socrates to Plato, and then that he also was a teacher of Alexander the Great, which I didn't know, but it kind of bothered me enough to kind of do side research on you. And it kind of was like, well, how can that be that like this is one of his students? Because you think he would only teach the good. He would only hand it down to the good, the great thinkers. And it kind of made me start to think of parallels to sort of apostolic succession and who that next person is, who is the rock of the truth for, Peter on to Socrates on, if that made sense. So I've decided that Alexander the Great was more Judas and more sort of got the information but didn't appropriately receive it due to his ego. And that when the time came, Aristotle, it says, I don't know if it's true, actually kind of distanced himself and rejected Alexander, and actually that there, I'm not going to say it right, but Theophrastus actually inherited sort of the knowledge and the writings from, I had, who to go? Socrates to Plato to Aristotle to Theophrastus, because he inherited the library, the writings, and the Lyceum. And
the Lyceum, the Academy.
Yeah, so sort of who did he opt to, who was the successor, and sort of the parallels between the truth of God and sort of man's truths, and who we choose to hand it down, and what part ego plays in the barrier of receiving it and encouraging it, sharing it, and furthering it. And so I sort of drew those parallels, if that makes any sense.
Well, I mean, you certainly couldn't be Alexander and take over most of the world unless you had a pretty healthy ego going on, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, but it was just sort of, I don't know, you just think of sort of all of the great writings and education and all the things that Socrates is known for, and to kind of throw Alexander the Great in there and all he's known for, it just was kind of a head bob of, oh gosh, like what part did the ego play, and what part did, two people sitting before the same beauty, truth, master, whatever, how it diverges based on the ego that they bring.
I think that's like one of the earliest things that I noticed about religion, going to a Catholic school when I was younger, was the way that I always could see the truth like really underneath the surface. And I've had this thought for probably since I was like 13 or 12 or something, that it's just the way that people like take that information and then like pass it down, that everything gets misconstrued. And I remember, I have some crazy Catholic school stories, but like, it was wild. They had like this whole handbook, and I used to want to help with, like, you get excited in middle school. The teacher asks for help. Can you help me wheel this TV down the hallway or something? And they would only pick on the boys in the class. And I'm like, I always want to get out of class and like go do something for 5 minutes, but I wasn't allowed to because I was a girl. And that was like very strictly relevant to the things that they were teaching us. And I thought, well, that's not God. Like, I don't know what that is, but that just like, yeah, I think that's, and that's still relevant today to like, it's just like, it's everywhere. I feel like people, whether that's a result of the ego or ignorance, actually, I guess that would be the same thing, because if the ego is what is forming a barrier or a veil between subject and object, then like that kind of is ignorance, or that's where that would live. But yeah, that still is so true. And I feel like that leaks into everything, even like our current issues, societal issues, where people are choosing sides. And I know we mentioned that once before in like one of our first live lectures, but I feel like that has a big thing to do with that too, is people don't know the truth. People know other people's versions of the truth, which is kind of tainted.
Yeah.
So it's funny that we're talking about like the ego. I was explaining this to one of my professors. I was saying like I feel like I still read a lot, but I like fiction rather than nonfiction. And he thought that was like weird. He goes, really? Like, you seem like a very like intellectual, like, yeah, let's not make assumptions here. I'm like, no, I've always loved fiction more because I feel like you live 1,000 lives when you read fiction, and like I think I've been very molded by that. It's like I've read a bunch of different books. You fall into these, like, you sort of share the consciousness of different characters, and like I think like whoever I was before reading those books is very different to who I am now. Like that was the molding. I think goes the same way with like we talked about philosophy. It's not a one person thing. It's a collective dialogue, and like I think where people get lost is they listen to it and they're not molded by it, and they don't allow it to change them. Which you can disagree with someone, but you still have to accept that that's a perspective or an opinion or whatever it may be. Like you have to acknowledge that it exists. Otherwise, like it's a blind spot that you then have. Yeah. Like you have
it gets rigid, dry.
Yeah. Like even if you don't agree with it, you still have to be molded by it. I think. I don't know if that's right, but I'm like
at least be open to it, right? Yeah, at least be open to because and that whole thing, about the madman. I mean, as Socrates was saying in the Allegory of the Cave, when somebody's coming down back into the cave in order to liberate people, or we watched The Matrix last night again. It's like my 9,000th viewing. But when you're going back into the Matrix in order to liberate those prisoners in the cave, right? They're gonna think you're crazy, right? Because because they're gonna think you're mad, like Nietzsche's madman. But also if you are coming out of the cave and you're blinded by the darkness and your eyes are adjusting, people are gonna think you're crazy, right? And so there's this moment in there's this passage in the Allegory of the Cave where Socrates says, you don't know the difference. You don't know whether this person that seems crazy is actually crazy. Well, I mean, they seem crazy, but is it because they are coming out of the cave and you're meeting them on their way out, or because you're coming out of the cave and you're meeting them on their way in, right? So, I mean, you don't know. So the solution is not to say that your neighbor is right or wrong. The solution is to listen and then think for yourself, right? Yeah, you have to be open to listening and then evaluate things for yourself, right? Yeah.
When you read that, I think I maybe needed more sleep or wine or something, but when you read that God is dead and we killed him, it like broke my heart a little, because I'm like, yeah, I feel like I've done that in my life. And like the moments where we lose faith and, what we learned or felt or whatever didn't change, but we killed it, in that moment. And I'll jokingly say, I think I said in our meeting, like, God and I broke up a little while ago, and, we have our Catholic heritage, tradition, family histories, whatever. But then what are the things that kind of happen along the way where we kill that in some way? It made me sad.
Well, yeah, and in some ways it is sad, but in some ways it's also just a moment of growth, right? Recognizing when we talk about the Gita next week, and I'll just say this, it could be food for thought for next week, setting it up. But Krishna is an avatar. Avatar is some a descent, sort of like an incarnation, where God descends in order to fix things, right? Things get broken, the world gets really screwed up, and then But Krishna has these 10 avatars, or Vishnu has these 10 avatars, and most of them are in order to solve some supernatural problem, right? You've got some supernatural demon, and the only way to solve a supernatural problem is with a supernatural solution, right? So Krishna comes down and fixes everything. But in the Gita, he just takes the role of a teacher. He comes in the form of a human as a guru, as a teacher. And he comes and he teaches Arjuna. And the reason is because Arjuna is finding himself in a world that's pretty screwed up. It's violent and lots of injustice in the world. And Arjuna is trying to combat this injustice, standing on the right side of history. But Krishna is saying, well, this is a human problem, right? It's not a supernatural problem. It's a human problem. And the only way to solve human problems are with human solutions, right? And part of tackling those is remaining open to those sort of spiritual insights and that sort of thing. So that's why Krishna comes in order to give this wisdom, this spiritual teaching, but it's still Arjuna who has to either do it or not do it, right? And I think this is also what Nietzsche is saying in the parable of the madman, is that, right, it is no one, that God who's going to come down and just fix everything, it's not going to happen, right? But what that means is it's up to us to fix everything, right? So then that's why he's troubled by the atheists who are laughing at him, who think he's mad, right? Because he's the one saying, no, it's our responsibility. We have done this. I mean, there's also a lot of Christian overtones that I didn't really tackle in the lectures, but since Jesus was also killed, and so there's a death of God and death of Jesus paralleling there. Okay, let's shift because we're almost out of time. One thing that as Lindsay was talking, I just wrote down the word ignorance, and so there's so Shankaracharya. I didn't give you I'll queue up a picture of Shankara next time. But Shankara is this 8th century Hindu theologian, and he's Shankara the teacher, I mentioned a minute ago. But he has this line, avidya matram vyavadanam. Don't need to know the Sanskrit, but avidya means ignorance. And in English, we have the word right. So ignorance is a kind of ignoring, right? And ignoring. And so when you have beginning of this course, I talked about Brahmagupta and Brahmagupta's, reflections on zero, shunyam, shunyat, rina akasha, and that anytime if we think about what knowledge is to know something is to know what it is in opposition to everything else, right? So in logical terms, to know A is to know what A is and what not A is, right? To know the boundaries or the borders, the limits, right? To define as to where the finitude, to define the limits of a particular thing. And I was in the class use, red. So, right, once we define red, any light wave with frequency between 620 and 740 nanometers is red, and then if it's outside of that, then it is not red. It doesn't matter if it's infrared or ultra red or whatever, it's not red. So to define anything, to say what something is, right, is to have knowledge of that thing. But even Immanuel Kant, just even going on, even white people have good ideas sometimes. But so like even Immanuel Kant, said there's this regulative idea that that regulates our mind, so that once we say, okay, this is what A is, and anything outside of there is not that thing. So in order to say or to perceive, to see or perceive any bit of knowledge is to ignore everything that's not that, right? So as Shankara says, like, knowledge and ignorance are not two different things. You can't have one without the other. Knowledge and ignorance are mutually constitutive correlates. Knowledge and ignorance are mutually constitutive correlates. So if we think about that also in terms of ego, right? So ego is the I, and then everybody that's not me is not the I, right? So to the extent that I am focused on my ego, I am literally ignoring everybody else, right? And to the extent that I am focusing on everybody else, maybe I am ignoring myself. But I think any nurse, any good nurse knows that finding the right balance between those two things is not easy, right? And it's you're constantly trying to find the right balance, right? Obviously your job is to take care of people who are not you, to be a caretaker for everybody around you. But you also have to take care of yourself, right? Or then you won't be a caretaker for very long. So you have to find that balance, right? And I think maybe going back to that Gnostic mind, or that fourth state, or that, different ways of thinking of the clay, being shaped by those around us, and also shaping ourselves. What should we do? We should do a little bit of this text, right? Let's get into this text a little bit. Okay, so let's get into a little bit of this text. CJ, you want to put up the text on this screen? I don't know if can you see that? No, they can't see that. Okay. What if you make it big, and you just have to like scroll down as I'm reading it. You can cover up my face. They know what I look like. It's on the entire Upanishad is just one page. Can you see it now? Okay, I'm seeing nods. All right, so I'll read it. I don't know if I'll read the whole thing, but this is my translation. Om, that sacred syllable, is all this. Its explanation is all that was, is, and shall be is simply Om. And moreover, that which transcends the three periods of time, that too is simply Om. All this is certainly Brahman. This self is Brahman. That Brahman is this self, possessed of 4 quarters. Okay, so we'll just pause there. So that's that second line I just read is one of the 4 Mahavakyas. Mahavakyas are the great sentences, the great sayings. If you take the entire Advaita Vedanta tradition, which is the religious tradition we're studying right now, if you were to take that entire tradition, practitioners would say it comes down to these 4 sentences, and this is one of those 4 sentences. It's not even the entirety of verse 2. It's only that second sentence in verse 2. This self is Brahman. Ayam Brahma. Ayam Atma Brahma. Which Shankara says, when the teacher recites this to the student, first of all, it needs to be in person. So Atman, Brahman, is ultimate reality, right? You could say the God is a fine translation of either the self. There's only one self, one superorganism, as we talked about before. So the self of all beings, and all beings are this self. Irene is this self, Lindsay is this self, Lorelei is the self, Michelle's the self, Cyrus is the self, Lila is the self, I'm this self, right? But we're also, each one of us is different, right? And so Shankara emphasizes in this passage that when the teacher recites this line, Ayam Atma Brahma, the teacher should point to the student, point to the hridayam, the cave of the heart, where the soul and mind and heart, your emotions, where your essence is, and say, this self, this body, even this body is that, right? Is divine. And so then next, I'll keep going. So Vaishwanara, who is fixed in the waking state, who is conscious of external. So this is, as we talked about last week, the waking state, that vigilant state, who possesses 7 limbs and 19 mouths, who enjoys material things, is the first quarter. Taijasa is fixed in the dream state, who is conscious of the thing, who possesses 7 limbs and 19 mouths, who enjoys subtle things, is the second quarter. So you've got waking state and then dream state. Then verse 5, where the sleeper does not desire any desirable thing and does not see any dream, that is deep sleep. Prajna, the wise one, who is fixed in the state of deep sleep, is unified, who is a prajnanagana, a lump of consciousness, a mass of consciousness, who consists of bliss, who is certainly an enjoyer of bliss, and who is the entrance to the mind, is the third quarter. So many things I want to talk about in every one of these, but when I get through it. Verse 6, this is the Lord of all, this is the knower of all, this is the inner controller, this is the womb, or the yoni, This is the womb of all, indeed the origin and dissolution of beings. Then verse 7, they consider the fourth, the turiya, which I was talking about last week, the fourth state, to be not conscious of internal things, not conscious of external things, not conscious of both internal and external things, not a lump of consciousness, not conscious, not unconscious, unseen, beyond the ordinary, ungrasped, undefined, unthought, not to be defined, whose essence is certainly of the one self, tranquility of the manifold, pacified, auspicious, and non-dual. That is the self, that is to be known. Then I won't read the rest of it, but the rest of it then goes and takes the letters of Om, A, U, and M, and maps them to those first three states, right? The three letters of Om. CJ, you can take that down. So I have here Om, and so this is an Om, and the Om comes from these three vowels. A, U, and then M. And M we don't think of as a vowel, but technically it's a semi-vowel. It's like you don't need another vowel to pronounce it. And so the idea is that these three, in everything in between, when you're chanting Om, if you notice when I do Om, or when I'm doing it as I should do it, it sort of begins with your mouth wide open, like wide open and beginning with that sound, And so the idea is that you can't have any word without a vowel, right? You can't utter a word without a vowel. And so in this syllable, Om, you have all of the vowels. So in the past, a few times, we've talked about unfolding and folding, right? Explicatio and complicatio, or this evolution and involution, this unfolding and folding in. From, as Shankara explains, you can think, and actually the scholars before him too, have talked about Om as being all of the vowels, and therefore, since you can't have any word without a vowel, then it is sort of all of the words, but folded into this one syllable, right? So it is a transcendental syllable because it is the, when we're talking about Kusa, we talked about the difference between possibility and actuality, right? You can't have an actual thing without a possible thing, and so the universe of possibility is always going to be far, larger than the universe of actual entities, but we'll always include it. Likewise, Om is sort of the ultimate potentiality, right? It's every word, but every word in possible. Every word as a possibility, not as an actuality, right? It's not that all of the words are there. It's that every word finds its possibility in Om. And so that's one thing I wanted to talk about. And then the other thing, just to toss this in there, because I kind of said it earlier, but verse 6, this is the Lord of all. The word there in Sanskrit is Ishvara. And Ishvara, Lord, is a fine translation of it. Whoever translated this really knew what they were talking about. So Ishvara means Lord. As Shankara talks about this word a great deal in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya and here and in another text he wrote. I'm just dropping Sanskrit language all over the place. But, he's talking about Lord, and he uses, surprise, surprise, an example of clay, right? And that if I want to, let's think about Om as possibility, and let's think about Om in its characteristic of being mapping to the states of consciousness, but also in terms of the lump that we've been talking about, in a number of times, from Irenaeus to Kusa to Shankara and so many in between. And yeah, definitely Plato and the Phaedrus dialogue. But so Shankara points out that, all right, so from a lump of clay, you can make all sorts of things, right? Like you can make a cup, or you can make a pot, or you could make a bowl, or you could make a bowl for your pot, or you can do all sorts of things. So you can shape this. Thank you, Michelle. That's somebody left. So you can form all sorts of things out of this clay, which just is insofar as it's a lump, it just is all of those things in potential, right? It has the potential to be those things. So the material stuff is there. The material lump is no different than the material pot or the material cup or whatever, right? But in order for this lump to become a cup or a pot or whatever else, someone has to mold it, right? It has to have there has to be some agent there who is giving shape to that thing in potential. And so there you have Ishvara, right? The Lord, the agent, who is the agent of this change. And in the same way, exactly the same way as I said earlier, right? So when we're in certain states of consciousness, the world is just shaping our consciousness. We don't have much agency in it, right? The world is kind of telling us who we are, as Lindsay was talking about, in Catholic school, and they said, well, you can't do that because you're a girl, right? So the universe is saying what you can and what you can't do. Your environment is, enabling you to become who you are or inhibiting you from that in various ways. So that's sort of like the external shaping, which is still the Lord, right? But then the Lord is something coming from the outside in. But that you also have control over what you are shaping yourself into, right? And so then that's that Ishvara from within. And as Shankar is pointing out, right, the Lord is both of those things, right? It's not just me, but I am part of it, right? And so I have an ability to give shape to myself, and I can do so in a radically egotistical way where I just say, screw everybody and everything, I'm going to make myself into whatever I want to make myself into, to the extent that I have the power to do that. Or I could do the other extreme and just become whoever everybody tells me to become, right? And allow everybody to define me and to shape me. Or I can do something where in between, right? Where I become, I shape myself and allow myself to be shaped by those around me, because we aren't working as individuals, but are working, as a team, right? That Gnostic mind that Aurobindo was talking about, or that's so that I and my neighbor are not two, right? And also Ishvara is not two. Ishvara is not some other being. Ishvara is my very self, but Ishvara is not only myself. We can say just one little logical point to make this a little bit clearer. We could say, the lotus is blue, right? But we can't say blue is the lotus, right? Similarly, I can say you are Brahman, but I can't say Brahman is you. I can say Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, but I can't say Brahman is me, right? Because Brahman is it's the whole. It's not just the whole. Sometimes the whole is more than the sum of its parts, right? So it's the whole in conjunction or working with one another. Okay, that's 7:15. Not that anybody needs the room or anything, but I like to keep on schedule. So let's I'll at least stop talking, and then let's let you guys chime in here. And what are your thoughts or reflections or anything to say or add or anything?
I do want you to rent out the room for Airbnb. I feel like there's something there.
Okay. I need the money.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I think you may have inadvertently confused me, but something that I thought I was pretty solid on.
Okay.
Okay, so when we talk about the one and the many, right? They are mutually constitutive correlates, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is the one just a collective consciousness, but it's not its own entity, if that makes sense. Like, because you said, like, you know, it's just us. It's a collective us. It's the whole, right? But it's not in itself like us plus this, like, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. There's no like the soccer team, right? So you could have 11 players that are technically or like nominally a team. They have matching jerseys and that kind of stuff, right? But they aren't necessarily playing as a team. So but how do you get from that 11 players to one team? It's not like you add something, right? It's not like you go to the store and say, oh, we need more teamness. Let me just, douse some teamness on the team. It doesn't work like that, right? So it has to do, right, the difference between form and function. So it has to do, we live in a 4-dimensional world, not a 3-dimensional world. So in terms of the stuff, the physical material stuff, there's no difference between the sum of the whole and the sum of its parts. But in terms of how they function together and whether or not they're functioning, or in Sanskrit terms we say, or manifesting, right? Brahman, manifesting the self so that it can be seen. I reread my many versions of preparing for this lecture. I reread the entire Karika in Shankara's commentary, and in there, I totally lost my thought. Yeah, it's just gone. Yeah, did that answer the question?
Yeah. I also have another one if you have a little bit of time.
I'm in no hurry, so.
Okay. Okay. So back to Genesis, when we talk about, like, don't eat from the from the tree of knowledge, right? Because you learn the difference between good and evil. So how does that then fit in with, like, remaining malleable? Like, just from, like, a philosophical point of view, isn't that kind of, it's conflicting, isn't it? Like, to limit yourself from that knowledge, because you're not exposed to it, you're not allowing yourself to be altered by it, and, like, it's not like an active choice to learn from it and, like, accept things or, like, not accept things. Like, is that kind of a paradox? If I'm making any kind of sense.
I'm not sure I'm following. So wait. So what? Just start at the beginning again. Tell me about the first. So you were talking about the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
So to prohibit that knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that kind of?
Oh, you're talking about the prohibition. Okay.
Yes. So, like, by not allowing that, you're not allowing malleability.
Yeah.
Like, you're just going to be a lump of clay because you're not exposed to, like, it's not even a lack of exposure. It's more like you're not given the active free will to choose something and to explore and then either, like, be altered by it or experience it and then shun it because you don't agree with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I get it now. So I mean, at the narrative level, right, the way Genesis 2 and 3, just the way the story goes, I mean, they do have agency. They're I mean, the tree is put at the center of the garden, right? I mean, it's kind of right there. It's not like they said in Good Omens, right? Why didn't they put it up on top of a mountain or on Jupiter, right? Like, it's put at the center of the garden. And I think the way I read Genesis 2-3 now, especially with kids. This is a coming of age story. This is a story about children becoming adults, and they learn about sex and they learn about death, and they learn about those two things at the same time, right? And so sex and death are part of this coming of age, this growing up, of learning about what these two things are and why they're so intertwined, right? Sex is the only way to overcome death, because death is going to happen, but at least through propagation, then your DNA continues right afterwards. So I think if we look at it from that perspective, then maybe we understand the God character in Genesis 2 and 3 as more of like a parental figure, right? Who is like, okay, here is the knowledge, and when the time comes for them to eat of it, then they learn about the difference between right and wrong. So there's an agency given to them and open to them, even at the narrative level.
Yeah.
Is that?
Well, you said literally the words like the tree's at the center, and I was like, oh my god, it's the circle. And it's like that's raw, like platonic ideal truth right there, the tree.
Yeah.
And it's like, if the issue was like, you're not meant to take the shortcut and just like, no. It's meant to be like, I guess, but then it doesn't make sense with like the whole Eden thing, but you're meant to understand it through trial and error and through like talking with other people. Which doesn't, like, it makes sense in like today's structure, but not in like the narrative structure of like, it's just those two and Eden. And it's not meant like nothing bad happens in Eden.
But maybe it's also a transition away from parent, which is to, encourage that free will. Like, here it is, and I told you what you could not do. And, that, teenage sort of testing, transition, free will of, I know that in time they will, and at that moment there is a growth for good or evil. There is a breaking from the rules you've been given. And it's almost like a moment that is inevitable to come. They will cross that barrier that they've been told is the line in the sand, and it is the sort of pushing off of the rules of the parent.
I just have so many questions about Genesis, like, and it's because of Good Omens. Like, I'm like, you know what? They've got some excellent points, and I'm so confused.
Yeah, no, it's a really good story. Yeah, go ahead, Lindsay.
Something that came to mind when you were explaining your question, Irene, and I don't know if this has anything to do with anything, but it came to mind, so I'll share. Pink Floyd, their song "Shine on You, Crazy Diamond." One of the lines in that song is like, it talks about when you were young, your eyes shined bright like the sun, and then it goes on to say that you reached for the secret too soon, and now your eyes are dark like the moon, or no, you cried for the moon, and now your eyes are like black holes.
Like, a lot of words.
Yeah, so I feel like to me, my interpretation of that story could be like, there is, as a parental figure, you have to, there's almost an element of like, there's so much information that could hurt us, or like we might not be meant to understand yet. And I feel like a lot of religious, or like, I feel like just a lot of the deeper stuff in life can like almost like really screw you up if you don't have the right tools or the right structure to handle it. Like, if for instance, if like the truth of the world is that nothing matters, you might not be mature enough to understand that that is a double-edged sword. Like, nothing matters, therefore everything matters, and nothing matters, therefore nothing matters. Like, it's kind of like that yin and yang thing. But if you just attain that knowledge without the internal structure or like
Context, yeah,
then you could be screwed. Like, you could like really screw your life up, or like start being reckless and living like nothing matters, because you're only on one end of it. You can only see one side of it, and not like the whole thing. I don't know. That's just like what that reminded me of.
But it makes me think of you were saying how, if you're not ready for the truth, how difficult or harmful that can be for, if you use the parent mentality of children. And it just reminds me of my daughter when she was 6 years old. I think she had about a week where every day she was just crying hysterically about the thought that, and no one had for her, but that people will die, we could die. But Mom, why aren't you more upset? Like that we could die, people die. And I just was like calling friends and family, like, I think she just figured it out, and that none of us have answers, including Mom. And that truth and too soon, but before all of the skills are in place, and how devastating it can be to try to think about the finite and all the different things that come up against us. But yeah, I just remember thinking, like, I have zero answers for this truth that she just stumbled upon at such a I wasn't ready 6 years old age, that you just feel absolutely lost in the moment. But yeah, not having like the faculty to be prepared for it. And not that we are either, just putting that out there.
Yeah, I don't think you're ever prepared for it, but yeah. Okay, my kids are reminding me of the time, so so I think we should stop. But I'm glad that we're enjoying ourselves. So yeah, so thank you all very much for being part of this, and yeah, I look forward to your next round of podcasts and meetings. I think we have meetings next week or sometime soon, and then we'll do our last live stream next Thursday. So all right, and we'll do the Bhagavad Gita. So okay, bye, peace out.
Night, everyone.
Night.